In July of 1996, a 31-year-old Canadian man named Blair Adams embarked on a journey that made no sense to anyone who knew him. He was healthy, successful, and close with his family. Then, suddenly, he began telling friends he was in danger, that someone was trying to kill him. What followed was a week of erratic travel, strange decisions, and one of the most baffling unsolved murders in North America. On July 5th, Blair withdrew all the money from his bank accounts, thousands in cash, along with gold and jewelry. He packed them into a small bag and drove from his home in Surrey, British Columbia, to the US border. When officials noticed his unusual behavior, they stopped him, suspecting he might be involved in drug trafficking. He turned back, only to try again the next day, this time flying to Seattle, renting a car, and driving thousands of miles east, seemingly at random. Along the way, Blair stopped in several cities, acting increasingly paranoid. He told people he was being followed, that someone wanted him dead, but he never said who. Hotel staff described him as polite but agitated. He checked into one room in Knoxville, Tennessee, then immediately checked out again, claiming he didn't feel safe. Just hours later, his body was found half naked in a construction lot near a hotel, his money and valuables scattered around him. At first glance, robbery seemed likely, but nothing had been taken. Investigators were left with contradictions, signs of struggle but no clear motive, witnesses who described him as terrified but unable to explain why. There were no drugs or alcohol in his system. The case was as if fear itself had driven him into a trap. Detectives traced his final hours through security footage and eyewitness accounts. Blair had been seen at a gas station the night before, buying fuel and talking to an attendant who said he appeared disoriented. He had asked for directions to a hotel that was just across the road. Why he ended up in a nearby construction site remains unexplained. The scattered money, his missing keys, and the absence of any suspects left police with nothing but questions. Some investigators believe Blair suffered a sudden mental break brought on by stress or illness. Others insist someone was indeed following him, and that whoever was caught up to him in Knoxville. Nearly 30 years later, Blair Adams's death is still one of the strangest mysteries in the US South. A man who seemed to know something terrible was coming, racing across borders and time zones to escape it, but finding it waiting for him anyway. The field where he was found has long since been developed, but his story still haunts travelers who pass through Knoxville. Blair Adams ran from something unseen, and whatever it was, it never had to show its face. On the morning of January 25, 2019, 29-year-old Elizabeth Barraza stood in the driveway of her suburban home in Tomball, Texas. It was just after 6:50 a.m. She was setting up tables for a garage sale, something simple, something normal. Her husband, Sergio, had just left for work. Moments later, a figure walked toward her, dressed in a dark robe or coat, head covered, face hidden. The entire encounter lasted less than 20 seconds. Then the figure raised a gun, fired 4 times, and calmly walked back to their vehicle before driving away. The whole thing was captured on Elizabeth's home security camera. The footage is chilling, the quiet neighborhood, the early light, the calmness of the killer's movements. There was no sign of panic, no rush, only precision. Neighbors rushed out when they heard the shots, but the car was already gone. Elizabeth was taken to the hospital, but she didn't survive. She was only 29. Investigators immediately released the video to the public, hoping someone would recognize the killer's walk, clothing, or vehicle, a dark Nissan Frontier pickup truck. Thousands of tips poured in, but none led to an arrest. Detectives were baffled by the killer's composure. The video showed the person approach, speak briefly to Elizabeth, and then shoot. Even now, no one knows what those few words were. Elizabeth and her husband were both well known in the Star Wars fan community, often volunteering at charity events in costume. Friends described her as kind, creative, and full of energy. There was no indication of enemies or conflicts. Police investigated every angle, personal, financial, and social, but found nothing that explained the attack. One theory suggested the killer knew Elizabeth's routine, possibly following her social media posts about the garage sale. Another theory proposed personal revenge or jealousy, but no evidence supported it. Her husband Sergio cooperated fully with the investigation and was cleared early on. To this day, there has been no suspect named and no arrest made. In 2022, authorities released enhanced footage showing the killer arriving moments before Sergio left, waiting, watching, and timing every step. It added another layer of mystery. How long had they been planning this, and why her? The driveway where it happened looks no different now, quiet, ordinary, lined with trees and family homes. But for those who knew Elizabeth, it has become a place of grief and unanswered questions. A moment captured forever on film, showing a stranger who walked into a life and vanished again within seconds. Elizabeth Barraz's family continues to fight for justice, offering rewards and keeping her story alive online. Every year, friends gather to remember her warmth and laughter, and to remind the world that the person in that dark robe is still out there. The California sky was quiet on October 12, 1974. I was 19, newly married to my husband Bruce, and we just moved to Stanford for his studies. That night, we had a small argument. It was nothing, really, but I needed a moment to myself. I told him I was going to the memorial church to pray. I left around 11:30 p.m., never imagining it would be the last time I'd see him. Inside the grand church, I felt at peace. But I wasn't alone for long. A man was there as security guard. He was the one who found me, or so everyone thought. He was also the one who left me there near the altar in a way that would disturb anyone who saw. For years, my story became a ghost story whispered across campus. They questioned my husband, they looked for a mysterious man, but the case went cold. My family waited for over 4 decades. Then technology gave me a voice again. DNA from that night pointed to one person, Stephen Crawford, the very guard who claimed to have discovered my body. When the police came for him in 2018, he chose silence over answers, taking his own life. The why died with him. Now, my spirit lingers here. The church is filled with light and prayer again, but my story remains a reminder that darkness can find you in the most sacred of places. On a winter night in 1969, 23-year-old Jane Britton, a graduate student in Harvard's anthropology department, was found dead in her Cambridge apartment just steps from Harvard Yard. The discovery shocked the university community and remains one of its most haunting unsolved crimes. Jane was brilliant, outspoken, and loved ancient cultures, particularly archaeology. That January evening, she had attended a small dinner with classmates before returning home to study for her exams. She lived in a quiet brick building on Harvard's campus, where everyone knew one another. When she failed to appear for her exam the next morning, friends went to check on her. What they found inside changed everything. The apartment showed signs of a violent struggle, but little was missing. Police described the scene as bizarre, with traces suggesting a ritual element, something that mirrored the ancient burial customs Jane had studied. Whispers spread quickly across Harvard. Was the symbolism intentional, or was it coincidence? Detectives were careful with their words, but rumors of ritual killing spread through the media, turning the case into national news. Dozens of people were questioned, professors, students, neighbors, yet every lead collapsed. For years, investigators focused on Jane's academic circle, suspecting jealousy or obsession. Still, no evidence tied anyone to the crime. The case went cold, frozen like the January night it happened. Nearly 50 years later, advances in DNA technology reopened the file. In 2018, forensic analysts matched evidence from Jane's apartment to a man named Michael Sumter, a convicted rapist who had lived in the Boston area at the time. He had died in 2001, never knowing his connection to the case had been uncovered. Police concluded he was responsible for Jane's murder, but even with the match, some questions remained unanswered. How did he enter her apartment? Did he know her personally, or was it random? And what about the eerie details that mirrored her studies? Were they deliberate or coincidence? For Harvard, the case remains a ghost story whispered between generations of students, a reminder that even in the safest places, shadows can linger. Jane Britton is remembered not for her death, but for her intelligence, humor, and passion for history. Her friends say she would have become a leading archaeologist, uncovering the past piece by piece. Instead, it was science that finally uncovered her truth.
Sound of wind howling softly, distant church bells. The narrow country lanes of Cornwall twist and turn, shrouded in an autumn fog. It's October 1998. The air is crisp, and the hedgerows are heavy with dew. For most, it's just another quiet afternoon in the peaceful hamlet of Ruin High Lanes. But for one family, this day will mark the beginning of an unending nightmare. Lynn Bryant, a 40-year-old mother of 2, set out for her daily walk with her beloved lurcher, Jay. It was a familiar routine, a moment of peace in her busy life. She smiled warmly as she passed a local chapel, exchanging a few pleasant words with someone she met along the way. Moments later, a passing driver noticed her talking to a man beside a small, nondescript light-colored car. It was an unremarkable sighting, the kind of fleeting image that barely registers. But it was the last time anyone, aside from her killer, would see her alive. As the afternoon light faded into a cold, eerie dusk, a knot of anxiety tightened in her family's chests. Lynn was late. Her husband and daughter drove the familiar route, their headlights cutting through the growing darkness, calling her name into the empty fields. Their first chilling discovery was Jay the Lurcher, found waiting faithfully and alone by a farm gate, his lead tangled in the hedgerow. The sense of dread intensified. Their search ended in a nearby field, a place of unimaginable horror. Lynn's body had been found. The joy of their family life was shattered in an instant, replaced by a grief that would span decades. The investigation began immediately. A massive police operation swung into action, with forensic teams meticulously combing every inch of the muddy field and gateway. Officers went from door to door, piecing together Lynn's final movements. A sketch of the mystery car was circulated, and appeals were made to the public. But the man seen talking to her on that lonely lane seemed to have vanished into thin air. Newspaper headlines screamed for justice, but the trail went cold, leaving behind only questions and a family consumed by loss. Today, that same country road remains a silent witness to a crime that has haunted Cornwall for over 2 decades. As the fog rolls in, just as it did that fateful October day, the ghosts of the past feel unnervingly close. For a fleeting moment, the faint outline of a man in a pale car seems to linger in the mist, a haunting reminder that a killer still walks free. On the evening of November 28, 2004, the quiet town of Nairn, on Scotland's northern coast, was settling in for the night. At around 7 p.m., 30-year-old Alistair Wilson was at home with his wife Veronica and their 2 young sons. The children were in bed when the doorbell rang. Veronica answered to find a man standing on the front step, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap. He asked for Alistair by name. Alistair came to the door, spoke briefly with the stranger, and was handed a small blue envelope with the name Paul written on it. He went inside, puzzled, and told his wife he didn't know anyone by that name. Moments later, he returned to the front door. Seconds after that, Veronica heard 3 sharp cracks, and her husband collapsed in the doorway. The killer disappeared into the darkness. Neighbors saw nothing clearly. Some recalled hearing footsteps, others thought it was just fireworks. Alistair was rushed to hospital, but died soon after. The envelope contained nothing but a blank card. No fingerprints, no writing, no clue to the man who had delivered death to his door. At first, police considered robbery, but nothing was taken. They then looked into Alistair's work as a bank manager, a man with no criminal ties, well-liked and devoted to his family. The murder weapon, a small blue handgun, was found in a nearby drain days later. It was rare, decades old, and impossible to trace. Investigators from across Scotland joined the case, yet every lead went cold. Over the years, detectives interviewed hundreds of people and followed trails from banking disputes to mistaken identity. But the truth never surfaced. The description of the suspect, a man in his 30s or 40s, between 5 feet 7 inches and 6 feet tall, matched thousands of locals. The envelope marked Paul remained the strangest detail of all. Who was Paul? Why Alistair? And why choose such a quiet Sunday evening? 2 decades later, the case remains one of Scotland's most confounding. Police believe someone in the area still holds a missing piece of the puzzle, a face remembered, a voice recalled, or a story told in confidence. Veronica Wilson has continued to speak publicly, pleading for answers for her sons, who grew up without their father. The house in Nairn has changed owners, but that knock at the door still echoes through Scottish true crime history, a moment frozen in time, when an ordinary man opened his front door and stepped unknowingly into mystery.
On a quiet Sunday afternoon in January 1996, 9-year-old Amber Hagerman rode her bicycle through an abandoned grocery store parking lot in Arlington, Texas. It was a familiar place where local children often played. Moments later, a neighbor across the street witnessed a dark pickup truck pull up beside her. A man jumped out, grabbed Amber, and drove away. It happened in less than 30 seconds. Police arrived within minutes, but the kidnapper was gone. A citywide search began immediately. Officers went door to door, helicopters hovered overhead, and volunteers combed every nearby field. Amber's family appeared on local news begging for her safe return. 4 days later, a man walking his dog discovered her bicycle near a drainage creek, and soon after, Amber was found nearby. The community's hope turned to heartbreak. The investigation consumed Arlington. Dozens of witnesses were interviewed, and a detailed description of the suspect's truck was released. A dark, late 1980s pickup with a short bed and single cab. Hundreds of similar vehicles were checked, yet none led anywhere. The evidence was limited, the scene offered few clues, and the case quickly grew cold. Amber's parents refused to let her name fade. They spoke publicly about how, during those critical first hours, there had been no way to alert the community in real time. That call for change sparked a movement. In the years that followed, broadcasters and police developed a new emergency system designed to spread missing child information instantly. They named it the Amber Alert in her memory. Today, the alert system has helped rescue thousands of children across the world, but Amber's own case remains unsolved. Each time an alert sounds, her story quietly echoes behind it. A reminder of why the system exists. Detectives still keep her file open, hoping that one day someone will remember a face, a vehicle, or a conversation that could finally bring answers. Nearly 3 decades later, a small memorial stands near the creek in Arlington where Amber once rode her bike. Flowers and ribbons are often left there by people who never met her but know her name. Amber Hagerman's story is a tragedy that changed how the world responds to danger. Proof that even in loss, one child's legacy can help save countless others. In November 1969, 26-year-old Sister Kathy Sesnick, a teacher at Archbishop Keough High School in Baltimore, disappeared after running a simple errand. She had left her apartment to buy an engagement gift for her sister. When she didn't return, her roommate, another nun, grew alarmed. Kathy's car was later found parked a short distance away, neatly, with no signs of struggle. The only clue was a small dent and mud on the tires, as though it had been driven to a rural area. 2 months later, in January 1970, her body was discovered near a remote garbage dump outside the city. There were few clues and the scene offered no clear answers. The case quickly went cold, leaving her students and the local community devastated. But what was first seen as a random act of violence would, decades later, reveal something far darker. Kathy Sesnick wasn't just a teacher, she was beloved by her students, especially the girls who came to her for advice. She was kind, compassionate, and willing to listen when others wouldn't. Many of those same students later told investigators that Kathy had begun to suspect something terrible happening at the school, something involving authority figures she believed were harming students in secret. She had reportedly told one friend that she planned to confront it directly. Then she vanished. For years, the case remained unsolved. It wasn't until the 1990s that former students began coming forward with their stories, describing a pattern of abuse they said had been covered up for decades. Some believed Sister Kathy had discovered the truth, and that someone silenced her to keep it hidden. Others argued there was no direct link between her death and the later accusations, only tragic coincidence. Either way, the timing and secrecy kept suspicion alive. In 2017, a Netflix documentary called The Keepers brought worldwide attention to the case. It gave voice to those who had never been heard and reignited public pressure on the Baltimore Police Department. Investigators revisited old evidence, tested new DNA samples, and re-interviewed witnesses. But despite all the renewed interest, no one has ever been charged. Today, more than 50 years later, Sister Kathy Sesnick is remembered as a woman who stood for truth and kindness in a place that needed both. Her story is not just about what happened that night. It's about courage, silence, and the cost of knowing too much. The question still lingers. Did she die because she tried to protect her students, or because she simply saw something she was never meant to see?
In June of 1996, 20-year-old Karina Holmer arrived in Boston from Sweden. She was bright, adventurous, and had taken a summer job as an au pair, hoping to earn money and see more of the world. She wrote home often, telling her friends how much she loved the city, the music, the nightlife, and the sense of freedom. But one weekend changed everything. On the night of June 21st, Karina joined friends at a club called Zanzibar in the theater district. It was crowded, the music loud, and the summer air thick with heat. She was seen laughing, dancing, and talking with several people before stepping outside around 3 a.m. From that moment on, no one saw her alive again. 2 days later, part of her remains were discovered in a city alley. The rest of the scene was left unexplained. It was one of the most disturbing discoveries in Boston's history, and detectives quickly realized they were facing a mystery unlike any other. Who would harm a young woman who had been in the country for only a few months? Police questioned dozens of people from the nightclub that night, patrons, staff, and even those who had given her rides before. They traced her movements using public transit records and witness statements, but the trail ended in silence. The area was filled with bars and clubs, and surveillance cameras were rare at the time. No clear suspect ever emerged. For investigators, one detail stood out. The precision and care taken at the scene suggested the killer had experience or a chilling patience. Yet there was no obvious motive. Karina had no enemies, no debts, and no history of trouble. Her friends described her as trusting and kind, someone who saw the good in everyone. As the case grew cold, theories began to swirl. Some believed she may have left the club with someone she knew, possibly a man connected to the family she worked for. Others thought she'd fallen victim to a stranger on the street. Each lead ended the same way, without resolution. Over the years, Karina's story has become one of Boston's most enduring unsolved cases. Her name surfaces every few years as detectives re-examine old evidence with new technology. But so far, no match, no confession, and no closure. Karina Holmer came to America chasing light, laughter, and opportunity. Instead, she became part of a mystery that still echoes through the city's narrow streets. Somewhere in that early morning silence, between the music and the darkness, her story slipped away, and the truth has never returned.
On January 11, 2013, students at Lowndes High School in Valdosta, Georgia, made a discovery that would spark one of the most debated investigations in recent memory. Inside the school's old gym, they found a rolled-up wrestling mat standing upright near the wall. Inside was 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson, a quiet student known for his smile and easygoing nature. He had gone missing the day before. Authorities soon announced their conclusion. They believed Kendrick had been trying to reach for a pair of shoes stored in the mat, slipped, and became trapped. They ruled his death a tragic accident, but from the start, his family questioned how something like that could happen. Kendrick was tall and athletic. They didn't believe he could have fallen in so easily. They began asking whether something more had taken place inside that gym. Local investigators reviewed camera footage from the school, but parts of the timeline were missing due to system errors. Those gaps only fueled suspicion. The family requested independent examinations, and the results raised further questions. Soon, the case that once seemed simple grew into a national story, one that divided a town and caught the attention of the entire country. The Johnsons led marches and held vigils demanding that the investigation be reopened. Federal authorities later reviewed the case, interviewing classmates, teachers, and others who were on campus that day. After years of examination, officials said they found no evidence to support foul play. Still, many observers remained unconvinced. Different reports, conflicting statements, and missing footage left room for doubt and heartbreak. For Kendrick's parents, those doubts became a mission. They have continued to push for answers, not only for their son, but for all families who feel unheard. To this day, they maintain that the full truth has not been told. The school gym has since been renovated, but it remains a symbol, a place where silence and uncertainty still linger. Kendrick Johnson's story is not just about what happened in one high school gym. It's about questions that refuse to fade, and a family's determination to be heard. More than a decade later, his name continues to remind the world that every unanswered story deserves to be told. At 4 a.m. on April 18, 2016, fitness instructor Terry "Missy" Bevers arrived at the Creekside Church of Christ in Midlothian, Texas. She was setting up for her early morning boot camp, a class she had taught for years. It was dark and raining outside, and she was alone inside the large, empty building. Within 30 minutes, she was dead. Security footage from inside the church showed something out of a nightmare. At 3:50 a.m., just minutes before Missy arrived, a figure entered the church. They were dressed head to toe in tactical gear, a helmet, heavy vest, gloves, and boots, moving slowly through the halls, opening doors and breaking glass with a hammer. The outfit looked like that of a SWAT officer, but the walk was strange, slow, deliberate, almost casual. The figure never seemed in a hurry. When Missy arrived, the cameras caught only fragments before the screen cut to static. By the time her students arrived 20 minutes later, they found her lying in the main corridor, brutally attacked. Investigators arrived to one of the most baffling scenes they'd ever faced. There was no sign of forced entry. The intruder had clearly known how to get in. Missy's belongings, including her phone and keys, were still nearby. Nothing had been stolen. Her cause of death was blunt force trauma, consistent with the hammer the suspect carried. But who would want her dead? Detectives released the surveillance footage, hoping someone might recognize the suspect's unusual gait. The figure was about 5 feet 8 inches tall, moving with a distinct limp or uneven step. Hundreds of tips poured in, but no match was ever made. Even stranger, the church had no valuables and wasn't a common target for burglary. Police began to suspect the attack had been personal, carefully planned to look random. Attention soon turned to Missy's personal life. She was a mother of 3, active on social media and often posted about her fitness classes and schedule. Some believed her killer may have used those posts to track her movements. Detectives examined her phone records and messages, uncovering communications with an unknown man that suggested she had been uneasy in the days before her death. Still, nothing linked anyone directly to the murder. Years later, the case remains unsolved. No weapon has ever been recovered, no suspect identified, and the person in tactical gear remains one of the most haunting images in true crime history. The figure's slow, methodical walk through the empty church is burned into the memory of everyone who's seen the footage. A ghost in black armor, moving through the shadows. The Creekside Church has since been renovated, but the halls still echo with questions. Why was the killer there so early? Was Missy targeted, or was it an ambush gone wrong? And most of all, who was behind the mask that morning? At 4 a.m. on April 18, 2016, fitness instructor Terry "Missy" Bevers arrived at the Creekside Church of Christ in Midlothian, Texas. She was setting up for her early morning boot camp, a class she had taught for years. It was dark and raining outside, and she was alone inside the large empty building. Within 30 minutes, she was dead. Security footage from inside the church showed something out of a nightmare. At 3:50 a.m., just minutes before Missy arrived, a figure entered the church. They were dressed head to toe in tactical gear, a helmet, heavy vest, gloves, and boots, moving slowly through the halls, opening doors and breaking glass with a hammer. The outfit looked like that of a SWAT officer, but the walk was strange, slow, deliberate, almost casual. The figure never seemed in a hurry. When Missy arrived, the cameras caught only fragments before the screen cut to static. By the time her students arrived 20 minutes later, they found her lying in the main corridor, brutally attacked. Investigators arrived to one of the most baffling scenes they'd ever faced. There was no sign of forced entry. The intruder had clearly known how to get in. Missy's belongings, including her phone and keys, were still nearby. Nothing had been stolen. Her cause of death was blunt force trauma, consistent with the hammer the suspect carried. But who would want her dead? Detectives released the surveillance footage, hoping someone might recognize the suspect's unusual gait. The figure was about 5 feet 8 inches tall, moving with a distinct limp or uneven step. Hundreds of tips poured in, but no match was ever made. Even stranger, the church had no valuables and wasn't a common target for burglary. Police began to suspect the attack had been personal, carefully planned to look random. Attention soon turned to Missy's personal life. She was a mother of 3, active on social media and often posted about her fitness classes and schedule. Some believed her killer may have used those posts to track her movements. Detectives examined her phone records and messages, uncovering communications with an unknown man that suggested she had been uneasy in the days before her death. Still, nothing linked anyone directly to the murder. Years later, the case remains unsolved. No weapon has ever been recovered, no suspect identified, and the person in tactical gear remains one of the most haunting images in true crime history. The figure's slow, methodical walk through the empty church is burned into the memory of everyone who's seen the footage. A ghost in black armor, moving through the shadows. The Creekside Church has since been renovated, but the halls still echo with questions. Why was the killer there so early? Was Missy targeted, or was it an ambush gone wrong? And most of all, who was behind the mask that morning? On the morning of January 15, 1947, a woman walking with her child through a vacant lot in Los Angeles noticed what she thought was a broken mannequin lying in the grass. When she looked closer, she realized it was the body of a young woman, carefully placed and cut in half at the waist. Her face had been slashed into an eerie smile. The case would become one of the most infamous unsolved murders in American history. The victim was soon identified as 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, a Massachusetts native who had come to California chasing Hollywood dreams. Friends remembered her as shy but glamorous, always dressed in black with jet dark hair and a bright, hopeful smile. She had been last seen 5 days earlier, leaving a hotel lobby near downtown Los Angeles with an unknown man. After that, she vanished. The precision of the crime stunned investigators. The body showed signs of professional dissection, leading police to suspect the killer had medical or surgical knowledge. No blood was found at the scene, suggesting she had been killed elsewhere and transported. Her belongings were missing, and the only clue nearby was a heel print and a sack containing cement. Reporters swarmed the site before police could secure it, trampling potential evidence. Within hours, the press had given her the nickname that would never fade, the Black Dahlia. Over the following weeks, the Los Angeles Police Department was flooded with false confessions and prank calls. More than 50 men and women claimed responsibility. None matched the evidence. A week later, a package arrived at a local newspaper office. Inside were Elizabeth's birth certificate, personal photos, and an address book, all cleaned with gasoline to remove fingerprints. The note read, "Here is Dahlia's belongings. Catch me if you can." The sender was never found. Detectives interviewed hundreds of people, boyfriends, acquaintances, doctors, and servicemen, but no suspect ever stood trial. One theory pointed to a physician connected to the Hollywood elite. Another tied the murder to a series of similar killings across the state. Over the decades, dozens of authors and amateur sleuths have named possible culprits, including police officers, actors, and crime scene photographers. Each theory added more speculation but no proof. The case file now fills dozens of boxes in LAPD archives marked unsolved. Elizabeth Short became a symbol, not of fame but of the darkness behind the glittering city she hoped would change her life. She never appeared on screen, but her name lives in film, books, and whispered stories of Hollywood's golden age. More than 75 years later, the lot where her body was found is just another patch of Los Angeles soil. Unmarked, unremarkable, yet heavy with memory.